Granny had been thinking and got a plan, and then she got a jet plane what hovers. Granny lands the jet and we all pile in and Granny takes off right quick. In the jet it's not like a normal plane what has seats and pretty women in uniforms what smile and say, "Hello sir, hope you have a pleasant flight," and make you feel right proper cause what you was called sir. There was no women and no passengers at all. The jet didn't have hardly no seats either, there was just machines, what Grandad said were computers. And we went up to the front cabin where Granny were driving and there was more computers all flashing and buzzing and had switches and buttons, and I pushed one but nothing happened, so I pushed it again and we turned upside down. Everybody tumbles over and falls on their heads. Granny cattles and slams her hook on the steering wheel and we turn over and spin the right way up, so I pushed the button again and we turned upside down again. Granny thought this were fun and hoiked the wheel and flipped the plane over again, but before I could push the button again, Mum and Dad grabbed me and slung me out of the cabin, which weren't fair. The first thing Granny does is hover over the vicarage garden, because what Mrs. Smith, the vicar's wife, grows roses in the garden, and they're right pretty roses, and Mrs. Smith always wins the flower contest, what we have every year, and Granny never does, because what Granny's roses are the same kind of green what catsick is, and instead of leaves they got tendrils like an octopus, and they smell like a wet dog. But Mrs. Smith won't win this year either, because when Granny hovers over the garden it blows all the roses away, and it blows the earth away as well. Granny is right pleased, then flies over Mr. Bennet's allotment and blows it away, because Mr. Bennet always wins the best kept allotment prize, and Granny doesn't, because her allotment is a big pile of broken machinery. But now Mr. Bennet's allotment is a big hole, so he won't win the allotment prize either. And Granny is just getting warmed up and heading over to Mrs. Jones's vegetable patch to give it a blast, when a voice comes over the radio and it's a man and he's telling Granny to land, and what some other planes are coming to escort us to a landing field, but it's stupid, because this is a jump jet and can land in any field, and Granny don't need no escorting from nobody. Jets do come, what Grandad says is Air Force fighter planes, but they was rubbish, because they couldn't stop and hover around like what our plane can. So the fighter planes just fly around in circles, and the man on the radio is getting right leery and saying what we got to follow the fighter planes to an airport, and he wants his plane back, but Granny weren't having none of that. And after hovering over Mrs. Jones's vegetable patch and blowing her prize-winning cabbages over the horizon in a cloud of dust, Granny does something right great. She grabs me and hooks me over onto her lap and sticks my hands on the driving wheel and heads down towards our school and hovers over the playground. Granny does the driving, but it looks like what I'm driving, and all the kids in the playground look up and we hover right low and they can see me driving the jet, and I wave at my mates and you say what Myrtle Jenkins and Wendy Brown is in the corner of the playground standing by the pond, and what Myrtle and Wendy is in your class and they steal your lunch money. So Granny tilts the plane a bit and aims the jet what is making us hover at the pond, and all the water in the pond, and all the weeds and muck at the bottom of the pond, and fish as well get blown out of the pond and go straight at Myrtle and Wendy and all over them, and you cheer. And I want Granny to zap the head teacher what has come out to see what was going on, but the man on the radio keeps saying what we have to follow the fighter jets, and Aunt Myrtle says what the man sounds stressed, and she picks up the microphone and tells him what he should relax. And has he thought about taking up knitting, because knitting is very relaxing, and he should start off with knitting a scarf, then move on to socks, and she offers to send him some patterns for socks, because knitting socks is easy. The man on the radio isn't interested in knitting or relaxing, and he shouts what we should just land the plane anywhere and get out, because if we didn't, the fighter jets was going to shoot us. Dad shouts what Granny should land in the car park out the back of the pub, and Granny aimed the jet at the car park when we came down on the cars and squished some of them a bit, but that weren't the problem. The problem was that in the car park there were loads of big motorbikes what belonged to the Hells Angels, what were in the pub, and the jet what points down so what we can hover blows all the motorbikes over, and then they all blow into a heap at the end of the car park, and Granny lands on the heap, and even though the motorbikes are big and it's a big heap, our jet is even bigger, and when we land the bikes are squished flat. All the Hells Angels run out of the pub and see their bikes are flat and get right cross. Granny takes off again and blasts them with the jet, and they all blow out onto the road, what is good, because they were blown in front of a lot of police cars which are coming, and the police cars stop, and when they are stopped, we pile out of our jet and climb over the fence at the back of the car park and get onto the high street. And Mum says something, but what we can't hear, because all the people what were shopping on the high street are shouting and pointing at fighter jets, what were screaming around in circles over our heads. But Mum points at the pizza shop on the high street, and we all need pizzas, and we dive into the shop, but it's empty, because all the people what work there have gone outside. And we were right hungry, and there was the smell of pizzas and menus of different kinds of pizzas and pictures of pizzas on the wall, but there was no real pizzas. And Mum says what if nobody was in the shop to make pizzas, she would make them herself. And we went out the back into the kitchen, and there was ovens and sinks and stuff, and a big bucket thing full of stuff what Mum said was dough. I said I weren't going to eat dough because it looked horrible, and you said what, you wasn't going to eat it neither, and started to cry. But Mum said what, the dough's got to be flattened and stretched and made into round shapes, because pizzas got to be round. Then they get cheese put on top and stuffed into an oven and cooked. And Dad says he knows how to make pizzas because he had seen it on the telly. And what you got to do is pick up the dough and spin it and throw it up in the air and catch it and spin it more. And that makes it go round and flat. And Dad picks the dough up from the bucket, and it's like all a big lump, what's soggy and kind of dripping. And Dad starts spinning it, but what, it don't spin proper. And Uncle Ted shouts what Dad has got to spin it faster. So Dad tries that, and the dough does spin, but it don't go flat. It gets long like a big fat worm, and gets longer the more Dad spins it. And Mum shouts what is not working, and Uncle Ted whacks it with his wooden leg, and Aunt Myrtle pokes it with her knitting needles, but it weren't looking like a pizza. Then Dad remembers what has got to be thrown in the air, so he throws it up, and it goes up, but it doesn't come back down. What, it is stuck on the ceiling. It starts dripping down off the ceiling, but it was sticky and slow, and the ceiling were black with muck, because what the cleaners didn't clean his ceiling for years, it looked like, and the dough was all mucky as well. And Mum was shouting at Dad for being an idiot. Then we can hear sirens and more shouting, and the pizza shop door opens, and we look out the front, and there's police cars going up and down the street, and Hell's Angels come into the pizza shop. But they wasn't fighting on out, and that's because they don't have their motorbikes no more, because Granny had squished them, and what, they look stupid without their bikes. They was angry and sad because their bikes were special bikes called hogs, what only Hell's Angels have. But being angry and sad at the same time is difficult, and not having motorbikes is difficult because the Hell's Angels is all old and fat and can't walk good. So they come into the pizza shop for a scoff. Then the customers and the people who work in the pizza shop come back in the front door, and we dive out the back door. And that was just a start, because Granny had been thinking, and when Granny gets to thinking, things can get right bonkers.